For everything we know about ancient history, there is still a vast amount of knowledge we have never found, and perhaps never will. Science cannot explain everything, and a lot of ancient civilizations carried their secrets into the grave, leaving us to wonder what they truly meant by their rituals, symbols, and colossal architectural creations thousands of years later. So, with no clear explanations, what we're left with is an archaeological mystery, and this video is full of them. So, let's begin this list with number 15, the mysterious Merimda head. At Merim Beni Salama in northern Egypt, archaeologists once found a small clay head dating back nearly 7,000 years. The object looks rough and unfinished compared to later Egyptian art, but that is exactly why it matters so much. Early Egyptian cultures rarely created realistic human faces in three-dimensional form as this. Most imagery from that period focused on animals, symbols, or simple patterns. But somebody sat down, shaped eyes, a nose, and a mouth from wet clay, then left the piece among ordinary settlement debris instead of placing it inside a grave or shrine. Nothing about it suggests wealth or ceremony. There are no decorations, no paint, and no attempt to idealize the figure. It feels personal, almost experimental, like someone trying to preserve a human face long before Egyptian civilization fully formed. The strange part is how isolated the object seems. Similar human sculptures from that era are extremely rare. That leaves archaeologists with a simple but haunting question. Why was somebody already trying to capture individual identity thousands of years before the so-called pharaohs even existed? Number 14. Wayland the Smith and Frank's casket. Wayland the Smith shows up in so many old European legends that historians still argue over whether there was once a real person behind the stories. Different cultures gave him different names, but the basic idea stayed the same. He was a blacksmith capable of making things no ordinary craftsman could create. One of the most important references to him appears on the famous Frank's casket, an Anglo-Saxon artifact covered with scenes from mythology and religion. What makes it unusual is that Wayland appears alongside biblical scenes and stories from ancient Rome, which says a lot about how important people once considered him. According to the legends, Wayland was captured by a king and forced to forge treasures while being kept prisoner on an island. Eventually, he took revenge in an especially brutal way before escaping using mechanical wings he supposedly built himself. The story sounds impossible now, of course, but ancient myths usually grow from something real. Somewhere behind all the fantasy, there may once have been a craftsman whose reputation became larger than life. Number 13. The bronze of the mysterious Luristan culture. For almost 100 years, strange bronze objects have been turning up in the mountains of western Iran. Archaeologists call them Luristan bronzes, but the name hardly explains how unusual they really are. Many of the figures show humans tangled together with animals, horned creatures, snakes, birds, and beings that look more like nightmares than religious art. Some faces even merge directly into claws or twisted bodies. The detail is what makes people stop and stare. Tiny expressions, sharp lines, and perfectly shaped forms were created more than 3,000 years ago using complex bronze casting methods. That creates a problem for historians because the people connected to these artifacts were believed to be nomads without permanent cities or major workshops. Bronze work at this level requires controlled heat, stable furnaces, and serious technical knowledge. Yet these objects continue appearing inside graves across the Zagros region. Every single piece looks different from the next, almost like each one carried personal meaning. Well, even today, nobody fully understands who made them or even why. Number 12. Vid Tibble Labyrinth. Well, nobody on Earth knows why the stone labyrinth at Vid Tibble was built, and that mystery has followed the site for nearly 2,000 years. The maze sits in Sweden near a region already famous for ancient Viking remains, although the labyrinth itself appears to be much older than the Viking Age. The design belongs to a style called a Trojaborg labyrinth, a pattern found in several parts of Europe, including England and Scandinavia. That connection hints at cultural traditions that may once have stretched across huge parts of the continent long before written records existed. The maze is built from carefully arranged stones twisting inward toward a center point. Some historians think the structure may have been connected to old pagan ceremonies involving spring rituals or symbolic journeys. One old legend claims boys entered the maze to rescue a girl standing at the center while trying not to touch the stones. Whether that story has any truth behind it or not remains impossible to prove. The silence surrounding the labyrinth only makes the place feel stranger and more mysterious with every passing century. Number 11. Teasel Pagan Figurine. A fisherman named Nikolay Tarasov went out to a lake in southern Siberia in 2014, expecting an ordinary day. Instead, he pulled something out of the water that looked genuinely disturbing. The object was a small carved figurine with an unnervingly human face and a grim expression that almost looked angry. At first glance, it barely resembled an artifact at all. The figure had been carved from animal horn roughly 4,000 years ago and is believed to represent some kind of pagan deity connected to Bronze Age cultures that once lived across the region. Historians still debate whether it belonged to the Okhinev culture or the Samas people, both of whom occupied parts of southern Siberia thousands of years ago. What makes the discovery fascinating is how easily it could have disappeared forever. Nikolay could have thrown it aside, thinking it was junk, but instead, he brought it to a local museum where experts realized what it actually was. The figurine now sits preserved behind glass after spending 4 millennia hidden beneath dark water. Number 10. Teotihuacan Civilization. Historians and archaeologists still argue over the people who built Teotihuacan because almost nothing about them is fully understood. The ruined city stands in the Toluca Valley of Mexico, surrounded by cliffs and defensive walls that once made the settlement extremely difficult to attack. Researchers believe the city already existed before Teotihuacan collapsed around the 9th century, although nobody can say exactly when construction first began. The architecture creates even more confusion. Certain structures resemble Teotihuacan designs, while others clearly show Otomi influence, leading many experts to think different groups eventually mixed together here. Archaeologists uncovered pyramids, ceremonial spaces, sculptures of jaguars, and a large Mesoamerican ball court, proving this was once an important center of religion and politics. Human remains discovered at the site also suggest sacrificial rituals took place inside the city. Later, the Aztecs occupied the settlement before the Spanish invasion reached the region. Even after decades of excavation, Teotihuacan still feels unfinished, almost like part of its story disappeared long before history had the chance to record it. Did we miss something big? Number 9. The Jotunheimen shoe. Nobody expected one of Scandinavia's oldest surviving pieces of clothing to appear melting out of mountain ice. Yet that is exactly what happened in Norway when archaeologists discovered a leather shoe high in the Jotunheimen Mountains. At first, experts guessed it was around 1,000 years old. Later testing completely changed the timeline. The shoe was actually closer to 3,800 years old, dating back to the Bronze Age. It looks surprisingly ordinary for something so ancient. The design resembles simple leather footwear still recognizable today, which somehow makes the discovery feel even stranger. A person walked through those mountains wearing these shoes thousands of years before the Roman Empire even existed. Nearby archaeologists also found arrows and hunting tools, suggesting the area was once used by hunters crossing icy terrain in search of game. What happened to the owner is unknown. Maybe harsh weather forced him to abandon the equipment while escaping the mountains. Maybe he never made it home at all. The ice preserved everything in silence until the modern world finally uncovered it again. Number 8. Disembodied figurines. At Tanis in Egypt, archaeologists uncovered a burial chamber filled with more than 200 Ushapti figurines arranged in careful rows across the tomb floor. Everything about the chamber looked complete. The placement of the figures followed strict funerary traditions, and many of the symbols pointed toward Pharaoh Shoshenq III. But one thing was missing: the body itself. That absence changes the entire meaning of the tomb, because Ushabtis were made to serve the dead in the afterlife. Their numbers, placement, and ritual arrangement were always connected to a specific person. Here, the entire ceremony appears to have been prepared in full, but the mummy was removed or hidden somewhere else. Archaeologists believe the burial was likely finished during a period of political instability when royal remains were constantly under threat from tomb robbers or rival factions. The figurines themselves were not thrown into the chamber randomly. They were positioned with precision, almost like part of a carefully planned ritual display. Number 7. The Ottawa Backyard Sword. Most people renovating a backyard expect broken bricks, old pipes, or maybe a few coins if they get lucky. A couple in Ottawa ended up finding an old military sword buried beneath their property instead. Contractors were preparing the ground for new decking when the rusted weapon appeared in the soil. At first, it looked too damaged to matter much, but something about it felt unusual enough for the homeowners to contact historians rather than throwing it away. Experts later identified it as a late 19th century officer's sword, likely connected to Canadian or British military forces during the Boer War period. The weapon probably dates to around 1897. The strange part is how it ended up there. The house itself was built years after the war ended, meaning the sword was already old by the time the property existed. And the most mind-boggling thing about this is that nobody knows who buried it or why. It's a mystery. Number 6. Painted burial vaults in Bruges. Most burial vaults were never meant to be beautiful places. Once sealed, nobody expected to look inside them again. That is partly why archaeologists were stunned after uncovering painted medieval vaults beneath a church in Bruges, Belgium. Inside the underground chambers were faded murals covering the walls with scenes from the Bible, including angels, crucifixion imagery, and detailed religious artwork still visible after centuries underground. The paintings date back roughly 700 years. The discovery becomes even more impressive when you remember how quickly burials happened during medieval times. Religious customs often required bodies to be buried within a single day, leaving little time for elaborate preparation. Yet somebody still spent enormous effort decorating spaces that almost nobody would ever see again. The vaults also contained the remains of dozens of people whose wooden coffins had long since rotted away, leaving only scattered bones and rusted nails behind. There is something strangely moving about artwork hidden in darkness for centuries. The people who painted those walls probably never imagined their work would one day be seen again by us. Number 5. Bronze Age Ball of String. This might look like nothing more than an old bundle of thread, but it's one of the strangest little survivors from the Bronze Age. Archaeologists found it near Peterborough inside the remains of a settlement that burned down around 3,000 years ago. Most of the village was destroyed in the fire. Wooden structures collapsed, tools were ruined, and almost everything organic vanished. Somehow, this ball of thread stayed intact. The fibers were probably made from flax or nettles. When the fire swept through the settlement, the material carbonized instead of burning away. Later, the wet ground helped preserve it for thousands of years. Making thread during the Bronze Age was slow work and required skill, so this probably belonged to somebody important within the settlement. Maybe a worker, maybe somebody responsible for clothing production. Or maybe it was simply an unfinished piece of everyday work that nobody ever came back for after the fire started. Number 4. The Divya Beb Flute. People still argue over this broken piece of bone almost 30 years after it was discovered. That alone says a lot about how strange it is. The object was found in a cave in Slovenia in 1995 and appears to be a flute made from the femur of a cave bear. If that sounds ordinary, the age is what changes everything. Some experts believe it was created more than 43,000 years ago. That would make it older than almost every known musical instrument on Earth. The real controversy starts with who may have made it. Many archaeologists think Neanderthals carved the holes intentionally, which completely changes the old image of them as primitive creatures stumbling through survival without creativity or culture. Critics argue the holes could have been caused by animal bites, but the spacing looks unusually deliberate. The openings line up too well to feel accidental. If the flute really was made by Neanderthals, then somewhere in prehistoric Europe, long before cities or written language existed, somebody sat inside a cave and made music simply because they wanted to hear sound echo through the darkness. Number 3. Hierakonpolis paintings. At Hierakonpolis in Egypt, archaeologists uncovered painted walls dating back more than 5,000 years, long before pharaohs officially ruled the Nile. The scenes painted across the surface already contain ideas that would later dominate Egyptian civilization for thousands of years. Boats move across the walls, armed figures appear in processions, and larger individuals stand above smaller ones in clear positions of authority. That detail matters because Egyptian artists later used size to represent power almost everywhere. Kings appeared larger than servants, gods towered over ordinary people, and rulers dominated scenes visually before a single word needed to be read. These paintings show that the language of power already existed before formal kingship fully developed. What stands out most is the presence of organized violence and control. The images are not random decorations, they feel political. Somebody wanted to display dominance, leadership, and hierarchy publicly, even before Egypt became a unified state. But no names survive beside the figures, and no written explanations exist yet from that period. Number 2. Viking Visby lenses. The Vikings are usually remembered for raids, ships, and warfare. Nobody expects them to show up carrying advanced optical technology, yet that is exactly what makes the Visby lenses so strange. These polished crystal lenses have been discovered mainly on the Swedish island of Gotland inside Viking burial sites. At first, they look simple, but testing revealed something surprising. Many of them were shaped with remarkable precision and capable of magnifying objects with very little distortion. That level of craftsmanship should not have existed in Northern Europe during the 11th century, at least not according to what historians once believed. Nobody knows what the lenses were used for. Some researchers think they may have helped start fires by concentrating sunlight. Others believe they were used for close, detailed work, perhaps by craftsmen or jewelers. The oddest detail is that lenses like these rarely appear anywhere else. Number 1. New England stone enclosures. Old stone enclosures appear across New England in forests, fields, and forgotten corners of farmland where most people pass by without giving them a second thought. Some are circular while others form rough rectangular shapes, and many have survived for hundreds of years. Their purpose has been debated for a long time, because not every structure fits neatly into one explanation. Local legends once connected them to ancient civilizations or mysterious rituals, especially when unusual markings or old place names appeared nearby. Historians now believe many of these sites served as town pounds during the colonial era. Farmers who allowed livestock to wander onto shared land risked having their animals captured and locked inside these stone pens until a fine was paid. If nobody claimed the animals after several days, they were often sold at auction. Even so, some enclosures still raise doubts because their locations and layouts seem impractical for ordinary farming use. That uncertainty keeps the mystery alive, turning simple piles of stone into reminders of forgotten parts of early American history. Well, if you've enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. Thanks for watching. We'll catch you later.